Welcome to the Writer's Craft here on Sparks 1524. I'm Nathaniel Miller. Today we're going to talk about part 3 of the series of world building for your novel or whatever project you're writing. World building is a unique opportunity we writers have to create, whole new worlds and take our readers somewhere fantastic that they have never been. However, world building can seem like a daunting challenge because you're creating a whole world, sometimes from whole cloth. And to create an entire mythos it can be an overwhelming task that derails any project you have. But this is something you can easily work through if you take it systematically. Now, in part 2 of this series, I talked with you about developing character backstories. My recommendation was in part one, my recommendation was to first off figure out what's the best way for you to record your information. I personally do good with outlines and timelines and bullet points. Some people do better with narrative summary. Some people might use a voice recorder. Part 2 of this series, I talked about character backstories, and my advice was to use whatever means that you like for recording information to record that information, but only focus on the specific parts of the character's backstory you need for that story. That way, you're not overwhelmed trying to create entire biographies for characters that may not be relevant to what you're doing. However, just because something doesn't make it into the story doesn't mean it's not important. There are a number of aspects of my detective's character, Isaac Shepard, that are probably never going to make it into print, but I developed it because I needed those aspects in my head to help me understand who Isaac is and how to write him. So they were still necessary, but I didn't create them all at once. The same thing goes now with crafting fictional and fictitious organizations, offices, lands, kingdoms, whatever you need. Obviously, if you're working in the real world, the world around us, you've got the easiest time of it because this world exists. However, that doesn't mean you're completely off the hook. There are legal considerations of copyright, trademark, and even libel issues. Slander spoken, libel is written. Got to remind myself which are which sometimes. For example, if you want to set a scene at a local McDonald's because it's a very common place in the town and everybody who knows that area knows that McDonald's, it depends on what that scene is. If the scene is something that could happen anywhere in town without altering the story, and the scene does not bring disrepute on that McDonald's, you're largely safe. However, if the scene is critical to the story and could only happen in that one McDonald's, now you're running the risk of a trademark and copyright infringement. Now, I am not a lawyer, I'm not a legal professional, and I have not played one on TV. If you're unsure of anything, talk to a legal professional. I'm just a writer, I'm just a novelist. I'm not a lawyer or a paralegal. Consult with a legal professional to make sure you are in safe waters. I personally like setting as much of the accidental detective novels in the real world or in real businesses as possible because it helps ground the story. But I will never set a scene in a real place that brings disrepute on that business. If I've got a scene that's going to have murder, mayhem, carnage, all the good stuff, excuse me, I digress. Uh, I will create a fictitious organization, business, or location. For example, in Case File 7, The Norfolk Murderer, the last case file in my second novel, The Norfolk Murders, the story's climaxes with a bunch of rape, murder, and assault. I didn't want that climax obviously happening in any real life hotel in Virginia Beach, Virginia, so I made up a one. That way I avoided the issue, but by describing the Virginia Beach waterfront as it is and then inserting my fictitious hotel in a spot, it's still a world that anybody who's familiar with Virginia Beach will recognize. If you're working on science fiction, fantasy, alternative history, another genre where you pretty much have to create a whole world out of nothing, clearly you've got more ahead of you. Don't try and do it all at once. Don't try and do it all at once. Just like with a character backstory, approach it piecemeal. Develop what you need. If let's say you're doing a fantasy novel, or let's say science fiction, because I have a science fiction project I'm working on, and hopefully we'll start writing here soon. Well, not hopefully, I will start writing it soon. You obviously have to create whole worlds. Depending on the science fiction. My science fiction project is going to be set in outer space, similar to Star Wars, Star Trek, Ray Bradbury's works, many of his works, things like that. So I have to create worlds, races, cultures, governments. Don't do it all at once. As you get the story idea, Create those races and planets and stars and star systems and empires that are only necessary for your current story. Figure out what you need just for that current story you're drafting and develop those things. If you do that and you focus just on what you need, you'll be surprised at how much starts bubbling up out of your imagination that's filling in this world, adding color, adding depth, adding characters and details. That's great, but don't let that derail you. Take those ideas, jot them down in whatever form you use to record information. But unless those ideas are critical to the immediate story you're drafting, jot them down and leave them alone. If you start focusing all on them, you completely lost focus on the fact that you're writing a story over here that needs to be finished, and you can start to feel frustrated and even feel like you're never going to finish. If you approach it with a little bit of organization, a systematic mindset, and a willingness to focus on what you need, jot down over here what you don't need, but that comes to you, and then put it away, you can get the book out. Let's be honest, where would the Lord of the Rings be if Tolkien hadn't created this whole map of Middle Earth? Well, it took him years to do that. He didn't just bat it all at once. World building is an exciting opportunity we have. It's an opportunity we have that almost nobody else does, because we're not, even when we set a novel into the real world, we're still working in a land of fiction. That gives us as writers a freedom to create things that nobody else has. It's a freedom only storytellers get to know. Take it systematically. Focus on what you need for that immediate story, even if you're working in the real world. And of course, if you're working in a fantasy world, science fiction, or some other genre that needs much more world building. But if you take it piecemeal, one piece at a time, specifically focused on the immediate story you're working on, you will be surprised by how much starts coming to you. And by the time you're done drafting that novel, you might have an entire encyclopedia of notes of ideas that came to you that you wrote down and then put away. Well, now during the editing process, you can start referring to those notes that you took, start looking through them and realize that, oh, this idea could fit into this story right here. And now it expands this character. It makes them much more sympathetic or much more spiteful, but it gives the audience some more meat to get into. Approach it systematically, just like with character backstories, little pieces at a time, and don't be afraid to revise it as you're drafting. That's the great thing. Until a book is published, or until a television show or movie is actually on the screen, as writers, we have the chance to tweak it. We have the chance to always improve it. Once it's out there, but that's why you can go on and in the next story develop it even further. Now, part 4 of this series will conclude with a look at how to handle the inevitable retcons that come along as you go. On April 20th, I will be releasing my third novel in the Accidental Detective TV series, in the Accidental Detective novel series. The novel is entitled And So It Begins. From releasing Proud Lion in 2020, The Norfolk Murders in 2021, and now And So It Begins this year, there's been a lot of development that's happened as I've gone from outlines on a page to actually drafting and fleshing out these books. Clearly, there have been retcons. There are details about Isaac Shepard's life and Abraham Gray's life, and So It Begins, that actually weren't imagined or created when I wrote Proud Lion, the first novel. It can be tricky to take, okay, how do I take these new details that came up to me now and get them inserted into the character's continuity, into the stories, the world building continuity, without jarring the world or making my readers go, huh? If I get one thing across that I recommend when it comes to world building to any writer is to approach it like any task with a little bit of project management. And that means breaking it down into small parts and focusing on what you need for that moment. Feel free to hit me up in the comments if you like. Feel free to like and share this video. I've also written more about this in my column on my blog at sparks1524.com. The link for that is below. Please feel free to check it out. Like and share this video if you think it'll help somebody else, and I would ask for your subscription. Until next time, go draft and create those worlds. Take your readers where no one has gone before, and always keep doing great things.